My name's Mark. I'm an alcoholic. Good to be here tonight. So I'm looking at my phone because I am old and I am forgetful and I am tired, and that's a bad combination for you guys. Let me just say this. First of all, I seen the lineup that you guys got coming here, the people that you have speaking. They're some of my favorite people in the world. They're some of the great communicators in Alcoholics Anonymous that actually, you know, for a guy that just couldn't stop drinking, those are the people that I would listen to, that would inspire me and just make it through one more day. So, and my first time that I hosted was Ralph White, who's you've had here recently, and I think he's coming even next year. Ralph is such an incredible guy, but I was so nervous, like, RJ, what do we do? And Ralph got in the car and he goes, hey, brother, let's go hang out together. And we just had such a great time. And I just want to say this, those kinds of things are so important in this program, is raising your hand and volunteering, doing those things, those committees, the clubs, you know, cleaning up. The simple stuff is how I stayed sober, and particularly early on. I was one of those guys that just could not stop drinking. Once I started to think about drinking, you know, the RJs and the Mikes and the Steves would say, call me when you're thinking about taking a drink. And I'm like, why would I want to call you? I just really want to drink. So I just want to say that, so we had a great day today. And I love it when people make, you know, because I'm nervous too. You know, first of all, this is a this place that you guys live at, pretty easy on the eye, you know. You know, this is like going out with a really, really cute girl on that first date. You know, this is super, super nice. And so, but we got to, you know, you know, when you get in the middle of this thing, you get really busy. I have a wife, I have kids, I have grandchildren, I have a job, I'm just full, a head of steam in this thing. And so we're busy. And so when RJ said, hey, Mark, would you come out and talk? And my first answer is always to say yes, but let me look at my schedule first. And I knew that I could only be here today. And I'm like, man, I would love to be in Utah for like 2 or 3 days. Hi, Gypsy. I just seen that you're here. Okay. Hello. And so I really would love to be here. So when RJ came and got me, he was full of excitement. And we did the Bridal Veil Falls. Now say that mount. Say that. I can't say that. Tippinogus, and yeah, and we had such a blast doing that. I got to meet Gypsy, RJ, and I seen a picture of Chitin. Yes, I got to see that. But I will say this, my 2 favorites were Zag and Charles. If you don't know who Zag and Charles are, get to know them. 2 little puppies that were awesome. I mean, those are the puppies that jump on you and love on you the whole time. Those are my puppies. Now, I'm going to mention mine real quick. My home group is so tired of me talking about my dogs over the years, but I got 2 dogs. I became a new dog guy almost 4 years ago at Christmas time. My daughter came to me. So let me just paint this scenario, paint this picture. It's Christmas Eve in St. Louis, and it's 70 degrees. Doesn't happen very often. I'm blowing leaves like a good dad and husband and responsible homeowner. And my daughter taps me on the shoulders with my wife, and she says, can we talk to you? I don't know about you, but those are never good conversations when she's got her mom behind her for backup. And so I put the blower down, I walk in, and that 20-step walk to go inside the house was a long one for me, because I'm thinking of all of these things that she's going to tell me right before Christmas. And I walk in, and she sits down, and of course I had to say something first. I said, well, I know 2 of us aren't pregnant here in this conversation, so, but what she said was, it wasn't any of that. She said, we would decide that we'd like to get you a puppy for Christmas. And that, I didn't ever expect that. And that's how my daughter is. She's always wanting to do stuff like that. And I've never owned a dog. I've had many of her dogs in the house when she moves out and leaves the dog there, but I've never owned a dog. And so I said, let me think about that. And about a minute later, I said, yeah, let's just do it. And so they went and got Kobe. I hate to say this. I am from St. Louis, and I am a Laker fan. I know that's not good in Utah. I'm a Laker fan since Will Chamberlain, so that shows you how old I am. So I named my dog Kobe. And when Kobe walked in the door, and she held him and she handed him to me, it's over with. And then a year later, we got Shaq, his little brother. So we have Kobe and Shaq. And for 4 years now, I talk about that and not the steps in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. And so I loved Zag and Charles, right? Is that it? Yeah, so there we go. All right. So I'm gonna get started. But I want to just say this really first because I tell this, I love this incredible life that Alcoholics Anonymous has given me. But I want to make sure that I say this so that you know, because I'll say, we get up here and we forget to say some things. And, and RJ goes, are you nervous when you do this? I'm still nervous. And I think I've come to the conclusion over the years I'm nervous because I'm going to tell you the truth. I was never very good at telling the truth. And so I'm going to tell the truth. And so I'm always a little nervous about that. But I wanted just to say this, and bless you. I'm here for 3 reasons. 3 reasons why I'm here. And you could put 1, 2, and 3 in front of any of those at any different time. I'm here, number 1, because of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm here, number 2, because of God. I'm here, number 3, because of the greatest love of my life. Those are the 3 reasons why I'm here. So my sobriety date is September 16th of 2003. And I have a home group. It's called the Gratitude Hour. It meets every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. in St. Louis. And we're about 100 deep every Sunday. We have speakers. We have that circuit speaker that comes in. We do it once every quarter. We're an energetic, enthusiastic 3-legacy group that takes meetings into treatment centers, institutions, and we carry the message 24/7. I have a sponsor, and I sponsor other men in the program. I always call that the business of AA. It sounds like a resume I'm giving you. And so my job when to come up here is to tell you what it was like, what happened, and what it's like today. And I told you that my sobriety date is September 16th of 2003, so I'm going to tell you about September 15th of 2003. And I know some things to be true today because I have worked with a sponsor. I've done that inventorying. I've done all of those things over the years, and I thought back about what was I thinking and doing and feeling and all that stuff that we do those days, those last few days. And so on September 15th of 2003, when I woke up, which was probably about 6 o'clock every morning back then, when I woke up, my very first thought was this: I want to take a drink. And my second thought was, how can I do it without anybody else finding out? Because everybody in my life knew that I was an alcoholic. From the girl of the moment to the employer to the family to the friends, everybody knew that I was an alcoholic. And in order for me to drink, I had to do it without hoping that you wouldn't find out. And I wasn't very good at that. And so that was my first thought. And looking back and doing those inventories, I think for nearly 20 years, that's how I woke up every single morning. You see, I drink. I learned it in AA by going to a lot of AA meetings that I was a late starter in AA. You know how people say, yeah, I sipped on my dad's beer, taking it to him at 6 years old and 7 years old and 8 years old. I took my first drink at 19 years old, my last day of my freshman year in college. I drank for 20 years. Now, if you do the math, when I told you my sobriety date, I'm at that crazy stage in my life where I've actually been sober longer than I've drank, which is mind-boggling to me. And so that's what it was like. That's what I woke up to every single morning. And so that morning in September 15th of 2003, I got up and I brushed my teeth and I combed my hair, and I was what the book describes clearly. I was restless, irritable, and full of discontent. I got in my car, I was driving, and it was a beautiful day like today. It was 70 degrees, the skies were blue, the birds were singing, and the only thing in my head was, man, I just can't wait to have some ease and comfort. And that came from the King alcohol. That's where that ease and comfort came from me. And so I drive to the office, and I worked about 30 minutes away. And we were having a sales meeting on that Monday morning. And that Monday morning, I go up into the second floor, and I was just kind of looking out the window, daydreaming, thinking about how can I get out of here and go drink when he's done talking. And I mentioned my boss really quickly. I don't know about you, but wherever you work today or wherever you worked in the past, do you remember those people that used to always get called in the boss's office that were always in trouble? Well, that was me. And it wasn't too long before that day, that sales meeting that I'm describing right now, that he called me in his office. And when you walk down it's a long hallway to his office. And it seems like it's dimly lit until you get into his office. The spotlight's on you when you walk in. And I walked right in, and on my way that I'm there, getting to his office, I was thinking, what could he be calling me in there for? And it could have been one of 10 things that he was calling me in there for. And I didn't know. But on his desk was a piece of paper. And on that piece of paper was a pen. And he said, here, I need you to sign this. Now, at that time in my life, I didn't read anything. I felt probably the quickest way for me to get out of that office was to sign it and move on, to follow his instructions. Well, but what I signed was a no drink, no drug contract. That meant if I was to drink or drug, I'd be fired on the spot. I was susceptible to a breathalyzer, a blood test, and if I failed, I would be fired right on the spot. I signed that, and here's the delusion in my life at the time. I had tried to stop drinking many, many times, and I would drink every single time I thought about it. As I was walking out of that office, I thought, man, I really like that guy. Maybe I'll stop drinking now. Fast forward a few days later, I'm in that sales meeting on September 15th of 2003. And as he's talking about, what we're supposed to do that day, I started to formulate that alcoholic plan, okay? There's two parts to this alcoholic plan, okay? Number one, once he's done, I'm going to go drink, and I need to be back at 1 o'clock, okay? From 1 o'clock on, I'm going to be busy throughout the day. And so, and I know all eyes will be on me come 1 o'clock. So that's the plan. Okay, number one, I'm going to go drink, and I'm going to be back at 1 o'clock. And number two, now this is the most important part to the story. I said, do not do anything to get into trouble. You see, I was on the cusp of a whole lot of trouble. The last few times that I drank, I was inches away. We call it seconds and inches in AA, where I was going to get into a whole lot of trouble. And so as he's done talking, again, number one, I'm going to go drink. I'm going to be done at 1 o'clock. I'm going to be back in the office, and then do not get into any trouble. So I get in my car. I drive to a convenience store. I buy some alcohol. And I started to drive. I didn't go to bars anymore. I was the guy that once I started to drink, this is what happened to me. And I don't hear this often in AA, but that's back when we had to wear a suit and tie. I hate to wear a suit and tie today, but I had to wear a suit and tie back then. And I would turn red, and I would sweat a lot. The inside of my T-shirt would be sopping wet. My dress shirt would be wet. My tie would be damp. And I'm in a car on a 70-degree day that I have the front defroster and the rear window defroster on, because that's how I drank. That's what it was like for me. And I'm driving around the St. Louis area like a madman. And I get to it. I don't know if anybody's here from St. Louis, but I get to a point in St. Louis in the county at Highway 270 and Manchester Road. And I looked at my watch, and it said 10 after 1. And I knew then that I was 20 minutes from the office, that if I go into the office, that the moment I walk in and look like this, that I'd be fired on the spot. Now, the thing I didn't tell you was that my only means of transportation was that company car that they gave me. So not only would I lose my job, I would lose my transportation. And so I thought, okay, it's Monday afternoon. I should go home. But the girl of the moment was at home. And I knew that if I tried to go in to the house, the girl of the moment would ask me to leave. You see, it wasn't too long before then that I went home to that girl of the moment. I was the guy that didn't own anything. And I said this, I told RJ this today. If I dated your sister, you'd want to put a bullet in my head. I was that kind of guy. I was a useless, irresponsible human being. I didn't own anything. I drank and drugged everything away whenever I would work and get paid. That's what I did. And so I remember it wasn't too long before that day that I came home and I had been drinking. And she says that you have to go. And I gave her that same story that I gave her all the time, that I gave all of those women and all of those family members and all those employers. I promised them that I would never drink again. I promised them that I would be a responsible human being. I promised them that I would take care of them. You see, when I moved during those days, I moved in a white bag or a black bag. because I didn't even have a suitcase. But that day when I talked my way in, she had my little belongings in a suitcase, and it was by the front door. Because to her, it wasn't a matter if I was going to drink again. It was just a matter of when I was going to drink. And so I knew then if I went back to the house that she would ask me to leave and I wouldn't have no place to go. So work, I lose my job, and I lose my means of transportation. I go home, and I'm going to be asked to leave. And that's about 10 after 1, and approximately 15 minutes later, I walked into an Allegiant bank, and I robbed that bank. And that was the last time that I took a drink. And I tell you that story that suddenly because that's how quickly I thought about it. And by the way, I'm not a bank robber on the run that got away with it telling that story in AA. I got caught later on in the night, and I don't know if you believe this or not, but there are consequences to robbing a bank in St. Louis County, and I'm going to tell you about those here in a second. And so every now and then, generally when I do these things, when I go speak somewhere, I bring somebody with me. It's always a new guy, and I'm going to kind of get off of what I was just telling you for just a second. I have a sponsor who's he's just a fantastic human being, but you know how your sponsors talk a lot. You know how sometimes you put them on speakerphone and you start doing other things, because my sponsor can talk all day. And so my sponsor one day he goes, hey Mark, you want to have a storybook life? And I'm like, well, first of all, who says storybook? I mean, who uses that word? I never could. Yeah. So, but it got my attention. Okay, yes, Harold. I would love to have a storybook life. Will you tell me what I need to do to have a storybook life? And he goes, you do 2 things. Well, okay. What are those 2 things? He goes, number 1, Mark, you always have a new guy. And number 2, you take a meeting to a place that you don't want to end up once a week. You do that, you will have a storybook life. I will tell you that that's absolutely the case. And so, but every now and then that new guy will say to me, he goes, hey, Mark, why don't you go, when you talk to these people about your story, why don't you talk about the other 20 years of drinking? And let me just say this is what it was like in 20 years of me drinking. I told you I took that first drink my last day of my freshman year when I was 19 years old. A bunch of us, I went to a small Division III school. I was on the basketball team. I sat on the bench. I never played. And a bunch of football players and basketball players had a bottle of vodka, and they were passing it around in big glasses of orange juice. All I could taste was orange juice. I'm like, well, this is really silly. So I grabbed a shot of vodka, and I did this, and this is what happened. I got this immediate warm feeling that I really, really liked, and when it hit my stomach, I felt this is what I turned into. I was a 155-pound, red-haired, pimple-faced, skinny, as white gets kid that was scared to talk to any female on campus. The moment I took that alcohol and it hit my stomach, I became James Bond in a tuxedo, and that brown duster that I had to start with my finger was an Aston Martin. And the next morning when I woke up and I had a hangover and my head hurt and I felt nauseous, I said, man, I can't wait to do that again. And so this is what it was like for me prior to that day that I robbed that bank and my last day of my last drink. It wasn't the first time that I had handcuffs on me. It wasn't the first time that I was asked to leave a relationship. It wasn't the first time that my mom and my dad would look at me with just, really? When are you going to change? It was always that way. So that's what it was like with me when I drank. So what happened? And this is what I remember. I heard this. Bless you. I heard that and I looked up. I was in a jail cell. It was a one-man jail cell right across the river in Illinois. And I looked up and it was a state trooper. And he looked down at me and he goes, hey, are you okay? And I gave him the stock answer that I gave every one of you for 20 years. I said, yeah, I'm okay, when I was certainly not okay. And he looked down and he goes, you know you're going to prison. And I can tell you that was not my favorite conversation of the day. But I realized then and there that my life was it was not going to be anything what I thought it was going to be. And so what happened was in the next few hours, I was picked up by the FBI. I was taken to downtown St. Louis. They fingerprinted me. They took me eventually later on that evening. I remember I was arrested on a Monday evening, and that was Tuesday. I was taken out to about an hour and a half out of St. Louis in Troy, Missouri, in a Lincoln County jail in a very small town that housed federal prisons and had a county jail. And when I drove there and I walked into that jail, I went into what's called a pod. If you know what a pod is, that means you've been to county jail. If they're like anywhere like Missouri. And so I walked into this pod, and when they opened it up, I became one of 16 people in this pod. When they opened that door, it was like a big party was going on that you didn't want to go in. It was loud, full of noise, people screaming and jumping around. And I walked in, and I went towards the back of the room, and there was a cell, and they said, that's where you're going to go, and you're going to go on that top bunk. And I jumped up on that top bunk, and I laid my head down on that mattress. And what I was hoping for, that this was just a dream, that none of this took place, that I wasn't really in Troy, Missouri, that I did not rob that bank, and that everything that happened is just a nightmare. And it wasn't. I didn't go to sleep that night. I tossed and turned the whole night, and I realized I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And approximately 3 or 3:30 in the morning, the marshals came and they cuffed me at my wrists, shackled me at my ankles, and took me back down to downtown St. Louis. And they put me in a holding cell. Nothing like being in a holding cell at day 3 of not having a drink, and you're there for 8 hours all by yourself thinking about everything that you've done in the world. And so they open the door, and they take me in the courtroom. And I walk in the courtroom. I'm in an orange jumpsuit, and nobody's attractive in an orange jumpsuit, by the way. I just want to mention that. And so I'm standing there, and this lovely young lady comes walking over. Her name is Jan Good. She was my public defender. She walks over to me, and she goes, Mark, I believe that the judge is going to release you on bond. I believe that that's what he's going to do today. And I think I uttered the most honest thing that I uttered in years at that time. And I said, Jan, if bond's a nickel, nobody's coming. You see, I was that guy that burned all those bridges. That employer that had me sign that no drink, no drug contract, he wasn't coming to bond me out. That girl of the moment certainly wasn't going to come and bond me out. My family has been through all the wars of alcoholism. They weren't coming to bond me out. I knew exactly where I was going to be. And that was going to go right back to that Lincoln County jail. And so they took me out of that courtroom, and they took me back to Lincoln County jail. This time when they opened the doors to that pod, remember I said it was full of bedlam and noise and craziness. This time when they opened it up, I walked in, and it was like as quiet can be. And I hadn't been to jail a whole lot in my life at that time, and I'm thinking to myself, well, this is probably a little strange. I wonder what's going on. And finally, somebody got the courage in an orange jumpsuit, walked over to me, and he goes, hey, you're in a whole lot of trouble. And my thought was, God, is he the brain surgeon of this operation? And we're all in county jail. We're all in orange jumpsuits. We're all in a whole lot of trouble. He goes, no, you're all over the news. You're going to spend a lot of time in prison. Now, I will tell you, that was not my favorite conversation of that day either. Between the state trooper and this guy, I'm like, listen, I don't want to hear from anybody. And so, okay, so now I got 20 plus years of thinking about what transpired those first few days. I think what I was thinking, I was hoping that would happen. I was done with my fight with alcoholism. I was done in the sense that I was, if there were pills to take, I would have taken them. If there was a place to jump off of, I would have jumped off of it. I just didn't do that. And what I was really hoping for, that I would close my eyes and I just would not wake up. To me, see, here's what alcoholism was to me. Alcoholism was this. It was like fighting Mike Tyson in his young days. You walk into the ring and you have all these hopes, and then right off the bat, you knew you're in the wrong place. And that's what it was for me. And I had done the 20-year dance with it, and it knocked me out every single time. But what I was really tired of looking at, I was tired of looking at your face, looking at that disgust at me, and how the kind of person that I am. How could you be that person? And that's what I was tired of. And so, arrested on a Monday night, was brought to Lincoln County Jail on a Tuesday. I believe this happened on Thursday. A correctional officer walks in, he opens the door, and he starts naming names. And he calls my name out twice. So I walk up there, and he hands me 2 envelopes. Now, I have not told anybody that I'm here, but obviously the local news has told everybody where I'm at. So I walk into I hand them, I grab the letters, I go back into my cell, and I open them up. And when I opened them up, they were from two people from Alcoholics Anonymous. One of them was a guy that's been sober 30 plus years that's still alive in St. Louis. And the other one's from a newcomer named Terry that I have never been able to find to this day. And they both had heard that I had been arrested, and they wrote these letters. And the letters essentially said the same thing. They said, Mark, we're glad that you're at a place that you can no longer hurt yourself. And we want you to know, but we are sorry about your circumstances, but we're glad that you're at a place that you can no longer hurt yourself. But we want you to know that we're here for you, we love you, and we care about you. Now, I don't know about you, but at that time in my life, on that Thursday, I believe it to be that Thursday, I did the blubber cry. I was crying. I had snot coming out of my nose. I just could not believe anybody could write that letter to me when I had just done what I had done in a place that I was at. And so I wiped my tears, and I wiped that snot out of my face, and I walked into that day room that I'd been there for a few days. And here, hold on that for just a second. And I walked into that day room, and I look over to that table to where you're sitting, and the table's attached to the floor with the chairs attached to the floor because we'd throw them at each other if they weren't. And on that table was a copy of a softcover big book. And I walked over there and I grabbed that book, and I grabbed that book and I read that book. In looking back, what happened to me then was when I read those two letters, this hopeless alcoholic had that much hope. So I grabbed that book and I carried that book everywhere I went. And I read the first 164 pages, which were the directions on how to get sober. But what I read every single day, the most unappreciated thing about this big book is the stories in the big book. I would read those stories because they were about people just like me. They were hopeless people that did things exactly like me, that felt exactly like me. And they told me how they recovered. And I would just be filled with that energy, you know. And then you wonderful people in Alcoholics Anonymous in the St. Louis area would drive all the way to Lincoln County on a Tuesday night at 7 o'clock to come and see me. Now, I will tell you, getting to Lincoln County on 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night is not an easy thing to do. And sometimes it would be 4 or 5 people, and they would take 5 to 10 minutes to tell me about all the things that they liked about me and say inspirational things. And I just could not believe people would do that for a guy like me. And I would go back, and I would get mail. And I write to people that are in prisons to this day and people that are in jails. And it takes a good amount of time to sit down and do it. I get up extra early just to do those things. And I would sit in my cell and I would read them, and I would still do the blubber cry. But I would take them this time and I would give them to the other 15 people that were just as hopeless like me. They were just as alcoholic like me. They were just as troubled like me. And I was hoping that they would get the same hope out of it like I did. But you can't rob a bank and not have any consequences. And in that book, in that 4th edition big book, there's a story that I just fell in love with instantly. It's the story Grounded. It's by a gentleman by the name of Lyle P. Remember that name, RJ. Lyle P. Lyle P. is a guy that flew the very first he was the very first airplane pilot that flew a commercial airplane under the influence of a passenger airplane under the influence of alcohol. I can't talk when I'm tired. And so, when this happened, I remember it. It was all over. It wasn't just the local news and the national. It was the world news. How could a pilot drive or fly a passenger airplane under the influence of alcohol? And so, and his life changed, and people like David Letterman and Jay Leno were making fun of him every night. Not just him, but his airlines. And his life just took a complete 180 from being a captain of an airlines. And I'm not going to tell you the rest of the story. That's something that you're going to read. But I just immediately fell in love with Lyle and his story of hope. And so ultimately, one day, I knew that I was going to be sentenced for what I was going to do. There was no more me putting on a nice suit, convincing a lawyer that I hadn't paid, hey, can you go to court for me? I promise you I'll never do this again. And I promise you whatever probation you give me, I'll do it, and I'll be that. I won't drink again. I'll be a responsible human being, the same old story. I knew that that was not going to happen anymore. And so what happened that day, I walked in that courtroom, and I had people there that were supporting me. But what I had was, I remember Lyle. You see, Lyle, in this world coverage of his case, goes into the courtroom, and he was scared at how much time that he was going to do. Now, I will tell you, nobody got hurt on this flight. Nobody even knew that he had taken a drink. But when he went into that courtroom that day, the judge shockingly did this. He said, guys, I don't know if we're doing this right. We may be doing the wrong thing by case law here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to sentence you, but I'm going to allow you to go home and post bond and go home today. And immediately the co-pilots posted bond and went home. And Lyle looked at the judge and he says, Your Honor, and I'm guilty of this crime. In order for me to walk out of that front door, I have to walk in. So I'm ready to go. So that day that I went into that courtroom, I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know if I was going to spend the rest of my life in prison. But I knew that I was ready to go. And so what happened to me, I was eventually sentenced to 8.5 years in federal and state prison. And when I walked out of that courtroom that day, I wasn't skipping like, I'm going to go do 8.5 years. I went back to that county jail. And I didn't quite understand this question when it was proposed to me. The guy says, hey, are you going home today? Because you look like everything went really well in court. I said, well, I got 8.5 years. I'm going to have to go spend that in prison. And he's like, oh, are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. But what I realized today, that I'd already started this journey. The moment I got that little bit of hope from those two people that said, hey, Mark, we just want you to know that we care about you and we love you and we're here for you, that I felt that. And when I started to read that book, I started to realize that people like me got sober. People like me, their lives got transformed. I didn't know if it was really going to be for me, but I was willing to try it. What else did I have to do? And so I get back to that county jail, and in about a couple of weeks, they're going to take me to whatever federal prison I'm going to. And this is just a suggestion for you if you ever need legal advice. Do not seek it from anybody in an orange jumpsuit. Okay? Okay? So I get this legal advice. I get back, they say, oh, Mark, you're a bank robber. They take care of bank robbers in federal prison. I'm like, I don't know. Are you guys smoking something right now? I said, no. And I remember reading Pete Rose's autobiography. Pete Rose went to federal prison for tax evasion, and he went to Marion, Illinois, not too far from St. Louis. And I remember he said it was barbecues and softball and reading and exercising. I'm like, man, I can do all that. I like barbecue, and who doesn't like playing softball? You know, and I'll get in shape. I'll get in great shape, you know. And so 2 weeks later, now I'm really still full of delusion. Let me just point that out. So 2 weeks later, they come in the middle of the night, shackle me at my ankles and cuff me at my wrists, put a shotgun to our heads, take us to downtown St. Louis, put us on an airplane. We fly to Oklahoma City. It's like cattle. We're all lined up, and they unshackle us together. And when they hand you a piece of paper, on that piece of paper, it's going to say the three initials of where you're going. And I'm picturing Marion, Illinois. Something an MAR or something like that's what's going to say. And the three initials on my sheet said LVN. And I'm thinking, Las Vegas? Is that where I'm going to go? Guy goes, oh, no, you're going to Leavenworth. Yeah, that's kind of my reaction that I had, too. There are words in the English language that get that reaction, and Leavenworth is one of them. There's not one good thing that you think of. Leavenworth, whoa. And that's what I said. And he goes, oh, they have a prison camp there, too. And I'm like, I don't even know what state Leavenworth is. And I quickly found out. So I walk into this office, and it was just like this, like 3 steps. And there was a big table in front of this lovely young lady and 4 big guys that you knew you didn't want to mess with. And that lady says, I immediately sensed that this was a map of the United States. But I realized that it wasn't the map that we learned in school. It was a map of every prison in the United States, federal prison. And I immediately seen Leavenworth because it takes up about that much of the map. the words or the letters. And so it's in Kansas. Well, that's not that far from St. Louis. Maybe somebody would come and see me. And she goes, you're going to the oldest penitentiary in the United States. And I said, well, that's not a camp. And she goes, they don't send guys like you to a camp. And I uttered maybe the stupidest thing I'd ever said. I said, but I'm only a bank robber. Yeah. Yes. Only we find that funny. None of the 5 in that room found that funny at all. And I was escorted out of that room. 2 weeks later, I was taken on an airplane, and I was taken to maximum security prison in Leavenworth, Kansas, and I walked in, and I will tell you that I was scared. I was absolutely scared to death because it looked exactly what I seen on television. And I walked in there, and they put me in they call it the hole, and they put me in the hole because they wanted to see what gang I was hanging around with. Well, first of all, I don't have a tattoo on my body, and I don't think I look like a gang member, but who knows? I could be the shot caller for the gang member. Who knows? But the reality is that was just standard operating procedure they did with everybody. And I got in there, and I looked out that small window, and my thought was, man, that was a bad idea going in that bank that day. And it was, and it was just, and then I was released from the SHU, and I went into the general population. And what I'll tell you about prison is, it's a lot like a Sunday with a bunch of guys that I hang out with. We'll watch football, we'll eat, we'll exercise in some form, tell jokes, goof around. But what's different than every now and then somebody will get killed right in front of you. And then you go, okay, now I know why I'm here. And so, but here's what it was like for me. I get there, I'm probably 7-8 months without a drink. I get to Leavenworth, there are 3,000 inmates. Almost every single one that was in Leavenworth had a life sentence. And so I was so grateful to be spending time with everyone that has a life sentence. And I got there, and everybody there was alcohol and drugs everywhere. And they'd say, hey, you want to take a drink of this? And I'm like, no. And they'd look at me like I had like 5 heads on. What do you mean, no? I said, yeah, I'm doing the clean and sober thing. And they would, really? And I'd say, they didn't care. It was more for them, so they didn't care. But they would say, but they'd always offer, hey, you want, no, I'm doing the clean and sober thing. And so, okay. But do we all know what 7, 8, 9 months of not drinking looks like? We look a little like our heads are out of control. So this is what it was like for me. I'm running around the track. I'm doing pull-ups. I'm doing push-ups. There are no AA meetings. I can't find a big book. And this is all I can think about. All I can think about are all of the things that I'd done to you, and I didn't know how to make them right. All of those bad things I'd done in my life, and I didn't know how to make any of them right. And I walked out on the yard one day, and there's this guy in the middle of the yard, and he's got his shoes and socks off. Now, your shoes and socks off is not a good idea in a maximum security prison because you need that traction just in case something goes on. Things that I know that I never wanted to know. And so, and he turns sideways, and he's got a big tattoo on the side of his head, and he's walking around the yard a little feminine. And I said, man, I'm not going to hang out with that dude. That guy, there's something wrong with him. And so I walked back into the housing unit, into where I was, and I was heating up some coffee. Now I'm about to tell you this story, and I'm going to tell you this is how it's been for me in my sobriety. God has always done for me what I couldn't do for myself. God has always given me that storybook life, and my job was what I just told you to do. Have a new guy, go into a place you don't want to end up, and not to drink or drug. Those are my responsibilities in this gig, and he's made my life an incredible life. And so I walked back into that housing unit, I heat that cup of coffee and turn around, and there's that guy. He goes, hi, my name's Anthony. Hi, my name's Mark. He goes, I'm a bank robber from San Francisco. I said, I think I'm a bank robber from St. Louis. He goes, I'm interested in starting an AA meeting. Would you be willing to help? And 15 minutes later, he became my sponsor. You see, Anthony had gotten sober in Lompoc, California, in maximum security prison, and he decided that he wanted to transfer to Leavenworth. They were going to have a faith-based program start up in Leavenworth, and he was such a model inmate, and he'd helped so many people that they moved him to Leavenworth. And I asked him, and what we did is the exact same thing I do today. We sat in a cell, we'd read the book together. I didn't understand step 1, I didn't understand step 2. I didn't understand any of the steps. And he would explain them, and I would try to figure them out with him. And in the same way that I do it today. You know, and I learned this in sponsoring people since I've been home. There are no circumstances that will keep us from staying sober if we're willing to go to any lengths. I told RJ today, I said, RJ, you know what makes a great sponsor? He goes, no, Mark, what makes a great sponsor? A willing sponsee. And I was willing to go to any lengths to stay sober. We would read that book. But what was the coolest part about being around Anthony was that I would get to see him in action. You see, Anthony would get up early in the morning, and he would meditate, and he would pray, and he would journal. And when they'd open those gates to that cell at 6 o'clock, he would get out, and he would look for ways to be helpful to other people. You see, in prison, you can't go to every place on the prison yard because of the color of your skin or the gang that you belong to. But you could if you were Anthony. Because everybody knew that Anthony was a guy that just looked for ways to be helpful. We have Anthonys in this room today. We know people that are Anthony to this day. They're loaded in Alcoholics Anonymous. He would feed people that didn't have anything to eat. He would read to people that couldn't read, and he would write letters to people's family that couldn't write. And he would look for ways to be helpful all day long. And I would run up to him every now and then with all of these things on my head, and he would just simply say this, Mark, I don't think we're going to be able to do anything about that right now, but what we can do is we can learn how to be of help to other people during a time of chaos. Now, I don't know about you, but to this day, I get busy at work, and I start that spinning a little bit. My wife starts to make my head spin a little bit. My kids will make my head spin a little bit. Even Kobe and Shaq will have my head spin a little bit. But here's what Anthony did for me. Not only did we talk about the steps and we did those inventories, but we would have a plan in place when they did come up. When I get angry, we have a plan. When I get fearful, we have a plan. When I start thinking about thoughts of the past, we have a plan. And it's simply this. Please, God, put somebody in front of me that I can be of help to. Please, God, save me from being angry and fearful and thinking of the past. And again, please, God, put somebody that I could be of help to. I become the hunter then, looking for ways to be helpful. That's the greatest thing that he gave me. And we started 2 AA meetings in Leavenworth, and there, you know, the rooms are packed many nights of people trying to get sober. You know, and I'll tell you this, when I came home, eventually there's an outdate to this thing, and I came home. I remember getting about a year and a half, 2 years I was home, I got a voicemail, and I hit that voicemail. And it says, hey, Mr. Wright, this is Joe so-and-so. I'm the warden of Leavenworth. I would like you to come back and talk to the guys. And I used to play that. There's no way I'm going to go back. I'd play it for everybody. And I had the pleasure. I got the pleasure of going back to that prison. I got to go in there all day. I got to sit in the cell that I was at. I got to see people that had that hopeless look in their face like I did in the very beginning. They had some hope because they were working the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Didn't matter how long they were going to be in prison. They wanted to be free. The old saying is, I became free in a 60-foot wall. I became free from alcohol, king alcohol, in that 60-foot wall. And so, you know, that outdate came, and I thought I was the most prepared. I talked to reentry experts. I talked to people in the program. They warned me about day one. They warned me about things. They said, have plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D. I had all those things, and I was ready to go. When that door opened up, I put on those clothes, and those clothes didn't quite feel the same. And I get in the car. The car's a lot more, you know, touch screens. Didn't know what touch screen was. And so I'm changing the radio station and getting my hand slapped every time I do that by accident. And I was handed the phone, and a flip phone when I was arrested. And my nose and my chin would hit the phone, and I would hang up on my family. And I'd saved some money while I was in prison, and I remember we stopped at, I believe it was a Walmart at an ATM, and I followed the directions I thought precisely. I stuck my card in, and the money wouldn't come out. And I thought somebody behind me said, what, are you stupid or something? Bless you. And I go back to the car, and I said, well, no, I'll probably have to do this again sometime. And so we're driving back home, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm starting to feel uncomfortable in my skin again. Now, I told you in the beginning of this thing, I was 0 for $1 million in not drinking when I wanted to drink. You would say, call me, and I would say, oh, okay, but I'll never call you. And so I'm concerned that the obsession is going to come back. And I'm starting to worry a little bit. And so I go back home, I see some family members, and I'm doing the walking around and a little nervous about what's going on. And I committed to going to a meeting. I was arrested on a Monday. I came home on a Monday and committed to go to a 5:30 meeting at the West County Club in St. Louis. And I said, any chance that we can go a little early? And they said, yeah. I said, so we get in the car and we drive there. I walked up to the club. First person shook my hand. Second person gave me a hug. And I've never felt uncomfortable in my skin again. That was 13 and a half years ago. I've never felt uncomfortable in my skin again. You see, when I walked into that room, it was a table, and there's a circle, and I sat right, and nobody was scared to sit next to me. They all kind of sit around, and we talked about alcoholism. And the moment you started to talk about your alcoholism, I knew exactly who you were. And the moment I started to talk about mine, you knew exactly who I was. I didn't feel any bigger, stronger, faster, taller. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And I committed to going to a meeting every single day, and we hear people say 90 and 90. I went to a meeting every single day, and I fast forward. I came home on a Monday, and I came around to that Sunday. And my sponsor said, Mark, you need to be connected to a home group, so you find your home group right away. And so I went, the gratitude hour I told you is my home group. I walked in, it's 10 o'clock on Sundays. I can be here every Sunday at 10 o'clock. I'm making this my home group. I walked in. I said, there's only 7 people there. I said, I'd like to make this my home group. And they do the funny story and say, we'll vote on it at group conscience. And then I raised my hand and I said, I'd like to have a service position in this home group. And they said, just show up next week. We'll give you something to do. And so, and that's what I did. I had a purpose. I would go to the group conscience. I would raise my hand. I would volunteer. I did every job. I have done everything in the 21 plus years of being sober, from emptying ashtrays to cleaning them, to vacuuming the carpet, to being on a board and sitting at the end of the boardroom. And no job is any more important or any different than that. It's just serving other people in Alcoholics Anonymous. And RJ said it perfectly. That's the magic in all of this. And so I described to you earlier this incredible life. But I told you before I got arrested, I was a useless, irresponsible human being. I was scared about working. What was I going to do for work? And I came home on a Monday. I went to work on a Wednesday, and I was a landscaper, and I was the world's worst landscaper. One of the guys that wrote the letter, David, he hired me, and I was making $10 an hour. I was just so grateful to be home. I mean, every day was a great day. And so we'd go out on the cruise, and we'd do things, and we'd come back, and David would be there, and he'd meet all the crews, and he'd ask our crew leader. He'd say, "So can Mark do this?" And he goes, "Nah, Mark can't do that." He goes, but can he do this? He goes, nah, he's not very good at that either. And after about a 7 or 8 list, David goes, well, maybe we need to let him go. No, we like Mark. He works hard. And so, and I did that for about 4 months. And I realized that the world is a much more expensive place than what it was before I left. And I realized that I had to do something different. And I was in the car business before my arrest for a short time. And we don't have time to tell the story, but what happened to me is that I told some friends of mine, I said, I've got to do something different. I'm afraid that I'm going to come home and we're going to lose everything because I can't make any money. And a guy by the name of Tom Seeger, he passed away a few years ago, so I can use his last name. He owned a Toyota dealership in St. Louis. And somebody told me a couple of people told me to reach out to him, and so I reached out to him. He said to send a resume and what happened that day, and so I did. And he called me in, and we talked, and we spent about 3 hours. And he goes, Mark, I'm going to hire you here, and you'll be the very first ex-con that I've ever hired. And from the moment that I started at that dealership, my life had changed. It changed the way my family lives. It changed the way that I live, and it's been an incredible relationship between that place and me being there. But the greater story to this is that he started to hire other ex-cons. And here's what I didn't do anything that made him do that other than I didn't screw it up for everybody else. Because the guy that I would have came home, lied to him, would have started drinking and using, and then I would have caused a whole bunch of destruction. And I will tell you, out of this small business of less than 100 people, there are 4 or 5 of those people that are ex-cons that are in key positions of this small business that help it run every single day. And it's an incredible way. You know, we fight like brothers and sisters as recovery people at the dealership, and we love like brothers and sisters at that place. And it changed my life. And I'm going to finish this with one last story. And I can't tell you how my life has changed. I've bought a house since I've been home, and life is just incredible. And if you ever want to talk about gratitude, I'll give you my number. We'll talk all day about gratitude. So I'm going to tell you about one last story, and we'll be done with this. I want you to think about, I got a letter when I was in Leavenworth from the daughter of that girl of the moment. And she described what her mom went through that day. You know, my mom cried all night because you didn't come home. And so when she got out of bed and she realized I wasn't coming home, she got it and she sees the suitcase still there. The phone rings in the kitchen. And she described how her mom answered the phone, and it was the FBI calling her to tell her that her significant other robbed a bank. And she's never been around anybody that would ever think about doing something like that, let alone live with somebody that would do something like that. So she hung up the phone and she sat on the couch and she turned on the TV, hoping that the noise of the television would slow her head down a little bit. And when she turned on the television, her significant other was on local news. And now she knew that when she went into the office that day, all of her coworkers were going to know, that her friends were going to know, that her sisters were going to know, and that her 2 daughters were going to know. My sponsor sponsors a guy by the name of Tom Iverson, who passed away from North Carolina a few years ago. A few old-timers will know Tom. Tom came up with this thing called spiritual mathematics. Spiritual mathematics is when preparation and opportunity come together and God does the introduction, then the impossible becomes possible. Well, that girl of the moment, I married her on a beach 9 years ago in Maui. And we have a life today that's filled with Kobe and Shaq, kids, grandkids. We live 5 minutes from the West County Club, and we have a house full of people all the time in recovery. And we live this life that was promised to me, that storybook life. And it's all because of Alcoholics Anonymous, God, and that love of my life. That's all I got. Thanks.